You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Plan to win is a journey, and if you start any journey, it's very important to understand the context and the environment in which you're participating in that journey. And we live in a world that's quite different, quite unique to any time since civilization, actually. In fact, the world that we live in since the early 1900s was pretty linear in terms of change for quite a few decades. So change happened, but it was fairly constant up until a point. And that point was the 1990s, the early 1990s, when the world connected to the internet. From that point on, we are immersed now in exponential change. The linear change world is behind us. We now live in this world of rapid change. And if, as people working in an environment that want to thrive in this environment, we need to understand the rules of the game, because we are playing this game called life. And the game of life has evolved. The rules have changed. The old world left of the dotted line is well behind us now. The dominant business paradigm in the old world was the paradigm of efficiency. Businesses believed that if they were more efficient with their resources, they would be more productive, more profitable. And whilst that sits there as a secondary driver nowadays, the primary driver is innovation. If you're not innovating, you're going to get left behind. You've got to ask companies like Kodak and Blockbuster Videos and the like, what went wrong? They didn't innovate. Yeah? You've got to ask companies like BlackBerry, who are on life support, what went wrong? They owned 50% of that telecommunications market back in the 1990s, down to 2% today. Yep. Whereas companies like Samsung, Apple, Netflix, Uber, the innovators, the disruptors, they're thriving. The old world rule was the rule of responsibility. Bosses in businesses viewed people, employees, as cogs in a machine. This is your responsibility, this is your responsibility. You're different cogs. You both do what you're told to do, what your responsibility is. You work together like a well-oiled machine. But that's fine in a world that's not changing very quickly. The old world didn't change very quickly. But in a rapidly changing world, the responsibility that you were designated on day one may be quite different, or it's the same responsibility, but there's gaps in between because the world's changing. Who's addressing the gaps in between? So nowadays, what we're looking for as employers, we're looking for people to be accountable, because accountability is about the outcomes. It's about doing what it takes to get the outcome. It's not about ringing Telstra or one of those companies and getting flicked from this department to that department to that department, because that's not accountability. The big one, the third big one, the old world was really about a world in which there was a fair bit of greyness. The areas and boundaries weren't really clear. So what happened was we bent the rules. Just push that check through, it's okay, we'll fix it up later on. Nowadays, we live in a world that's massively transparent. And that transparency is something that shines a light on stuff that's not squeaky clean. Integrity now reigns supreme. If I think back over time, back in the mid-1990s, the first real foray into this world of transparency was a royal commission into the New South Wales Police Force, where there were a whole lot of corrupt practices exposed. A lot of cops got out, some of them went to jail. But that was the first foray, and that's been followed like a tsunami of exposure, or companies that have been exposed for corrupt practices. Enron globally was a massive issue. The Catholic Church is going through it at the moment. The trade unions are going through their Royal Commission at the moment. There's a whole lot of New South Wales politicians that have been exposed. So there's a whole lot of issues that have been now highlighted because we're in this new world and businesses haven't actually caught up to this transparency phase. There's also the issue at the individual level where you've got practices that were corrupt, and you're like the Rolf Harris's, that guy from Hey Dad. You've got even people that, not necessarily corrupt, but just doing stupid things. At the start of the year, my son was at a private party got too drunk, did some stupid things. He's got a fondness for dogs. And anyhow, there was a video that found its way onto the internet. Yeah? And yeah, that's just the way things are. So nowadays, we really need to be aware of the new rules of the game. But what's transformed essentially is the type of boss that the businesses are looking for. The old world was very much anchored in this paradigm of management. Back in the 80s, when I came into the workforce, and if you were looking to get a promotion, they sent you on a management course. They didn't send you on a leadership course because this was airy-fairy stuff they never really grasped yet. Nowadays, no one ever gets sent on a management course. You get sent on a leadership course. Yeah, because there's been this evolution from the management paradigm to the leadership paradigm. Both leadership and management are part of the one whole. They're part of us being an effective boss. But it's where we spend the majority of our time. And nowadays it needs to be in that leadership space. In fact, I was made aware of a body of research that was conducted by Korn Ferry, an international recruitment company who do a lot of research into HR stuff. And they last year, 2015, yes, that was last year, yeah. Last year published some research into leadership competencies in Australia. And what they looked at on the vertical axis was the supply, how available these leaders with these competencies are. So the leadership competencies availability was on that vertical axis, and how easy it is to develop on the horizontal axis at the bottom. So the bottom left-hand corner, you're looking at those competencies that are easy to get and in wide supply, huge supply. So they're driving results and customer focus, easy to get, okay? The leadership competencies that are hardest to get, hardest to develop, top right-hand corner. What are we looking at top right-hand corner? We're looking at the biggest single gap in the market out there for companies when they're running, they're looking for leaders, is building effective teams. Now, what do we need more of in a complex, increasingly complex world is people to be able to step up and lead others and lead teams effectively, because the complexity means that people need to focus on particular skill sets, and they need to rely on other people to do other stuff. So from that perspective, really important for us to understand that this is a gap, and a gap that we need to address. In and around that, there's also gaps developing people, which is coaching of people. There's also gaps around culture development, which is driving vision and purpose, and also managing ambiguity. But that building effective teams is really important. And most people don't get the principle of building effective teams. They don't understand what this teamwork stuff's all about. Why? Because where do you learn it? Well, firstly, how important is teamwork? Most people will sort of say teamwork is really important. Yeah? So assuming that teamwork's important, I asked you the question, what are you doing if you're a business leader to develop teamwork amongst your people? What are you actually doing? I ask this question when I run workshops. I run a lot of workshops for companies, yeah? And for the audience, we'll say things like, oh, you know, yeah, we have lawn bowls, barefoot bowls once a month, you know, we get down and have a few drinks, and that's great. That's building morale. That's good. It's not teamwork, but it's building morale. What else are you doing? Oh, put a lunch on, and we have a few drinks on every Friday afternoon, and that's great. That's building morale. What are you doing to build teamwork? Okay, because teamwork is whilst morale's important, you're not going to get great teamwork from just getting people feeling good about each other. So what are the principles and fundamentals of teamwork? Well, the first one is that we need to address the mechanics of teamwork, because there's two sets of forces, and you won't read this in any textbooks because it's not written in any textbooks, but it's actually what I have learnt over quite a few decades of studying this space and having participated in professional sport. And I should ask you this, where do you see the best examples of teamwork? People will say maybe special forces in the army, where they sort of generate pretty good teamwork. You would probably say maybe something like the fire brigade. A lot of people will stick their hand up and say professional sport. What do all those things have in common? I'll tell you what they have in common. It's practice, practice, practice. Professional sports teams will practice 5 days a week. They practice teamwork 5 days a week. They'll have one rest day, they'll have one game day. Businesses, what do most businesses do? They have 5 game days and 2 rest days. No practice days. So how's teamwork going to happen? It doesn't happen by spontaneous combustion. You've got to practice it. Yeah? So what I'm sharing with you here are the fundamentals of teamwork. Firstly, there's the mechanical stuff, the stuff you need to get in place to make sure that the team is up and running. Yep. And from that perspective, you need to have a good strategy. If you're a boss and you don't have a believable game plan, people won't buy into it and they're not going to have the confidence. So you've got to have that to start off with. Then you've got to have clear goals, because people have got to know where they want to work towards or where they're going. So there's a point of alignment. Yeah. But then beyond that, there's clear role expectations. And what I've found in a lot of businesses is there's grey areas around roles, and those grey areas create frustrations. And when you create frustrations, there's obstacles. You need to have the right people in the right roles. In the bigger businesses I work with, a lot of people they've inherited people, and those people aren't fully engaged. And one of the main reasons why we don't get full engagement in a lot of situations is because people aren't working to their strengths, aren't positioned to work to their strengths. And the big one down the bottom that creates more frustration, so you've got to have the right people in the right roles, but what creates more frustrations than anything else is unclear team rules and team behaviours. Yep, it creates much more frustrations in business than anything else. But that's all the mechanical stuff, and the management mindset can tick most of that stuff. But where a lot of bosses get lost is in the dynamics. Yep, and the dynamics really relates to some key factors. Firstly, there's quality communication. Communication factors account for, according to research done at MIT over in America, communication factors account for up to 50% of the variability in team performance. And it's no surprise that communication in teamwork is a big question mark. Because where in your education system did you learn to communicate? There is not one course that you've done at school, primary school, high school, that's specifically on communication. So we're supposed to learn this by some magical trial and error. In fact, I'm trying to get, at the moment, some programs into schools that address this particular issue. Proactive support. How can we create an environment where people are proactively supporting each other? Not just there when they're asked can you give me a hand? It's how can I give you a hand? How can we create an environment where people celebrate achievements? As a boss, are you providing an environment where your people are acknowledging all the little progress, all the small steps towards the outcome? You look at professional sports, they celebrate all the little things. They don't just celebrate winning the game, they'll celebrate scoring a try, they'll celebrate putting on the big plays, and they're high-fiving each other. Why? Because that energy creates a state, a positive emotional state, and we perform best when we're in that positive emotional state. And the bottom one there is a sense of unity. If we don't allow our people to feel a sense of connection, then we won't have high quality teamwork, because people won't feel bonded. Simple as that. It's a visceral thing, it's not a cognitive thing. Now, all this is predicated on one key element, and that key element is to have a high trust culture. If you don't have a high trust culture and you don't work your butt off to create a high trust environment, then what happens is you will be left behind in terms of other businesses, if they grasp this, creating their teamwork, high performance teamwork. Because teamwork is a competitive advantage that's largely untapped in most businesses. The research tells us between 10 and 40% uplift in productivity if you can get your teamwork right. And if you're not focusing on developing teamwork because you're not working on developing the fundamentals, because what do most people do to develop teamwork? Most businesses out there who are led by bosses who just don't know, what they do is they'll organise, we'll go and do this, get this team building company to come on board, and we'll go and build this raft, and we'll see if we work together to build this raft and we get around the course quicker, then we're actually going to perform better as a team. That's rubbish, because that does not address the single fundamental issue, which is trust. Trust is embedded in us as human beings as a fundamental need. Why? Because safety is one of Maslow's basic needs. And the only way I can feel safe is to feel as though I can trust you. Yeah. Now, in simple terms, this looks like if we were to build a high-performance pyramid, team pyramid that represents teamwork, at the bottom of the pyramid we have to lay a base of trust. If you don't get the trust, you'll never get into the next level, which is the feedback communication, because people close up. People only open up when they feel they can trust you. And trust embodies 13 particular components. There's 13 trust behaviours that we should be aware of as bosses, and our people should be aware of as team members, that they can demonstrate on a daily basis. But most people are a bit naive in that space. And the top piece there is only when I feel that there's a high trust environment, that people are openly communicating that I'm going to commit to the common goals of the team and not my own part of the team, my own silo part of the team. That's when I'm going to give the team. That's when I have true optimised teamwork. I want to just look at a lesson from State of Origin. State of Origin is perhaps the most difficult physical environment for a rugby league player to play in because of the intensity. But I can tell you this, it's twice as hard for a coach to coach, because State of Origin teams are not selected until after round 10 of the competition. So these players are playing 10 weeks, plus they've had a whole off-season to connect with their peers, and they've got these tight bonds at club level. After round 10 of the competition, the selectors pick these players, the best players out to play for New South Wales or Queensland. Then the coach of Queensland and New South Wales has got these players for 8 days. Only 8 days is all they've got them for. Yep. So the coaches over the years have developed the formula. And the formula is one that businesses should take note of. The 8-day camp is broken into 2 phases. The first phase lasts for 2 days. The second phase lasts for 6 days. The first 2-day phase is called the bonding phase. There is no football training in that, no fitness training. Okay, it's all about connecting, allowing the players to take their masks off, which they wear to protect themselves from the media and other factors. But we all wear a mask around, to be honest. That's how we want to be seen. But unless I peel that off and allow people to understand who I really am, I'm never truly going to connect at a deeper level. It's more difficult to trust. Yeah. So what happens is that first 2 days is all about activities designed to get players to understand and connect. Then the next 6 days, it's devoted to the process of the football side. In business, when someone starts new in an organisation, what happens? They go through an induction process. In a bigger organisation, you'll have an induction process where you understand where people sit, who they are, the processes, all that sort of stuff, but there's no opportunity to connect. And one of the things that will fast track your teamwork is a focus on the ability for people to connect with each other. Well, I've spoken about all these factors, but you know what the number one factor in creating a high-performance team is? The number one critical success factor is actually you, the team leader. Because if you as the team leader don't understand and don't nurture and don't drive your people in the direction you need to go to and keep them accountable for the behaviours, because you aren't, a lot of them, why aren't they kept accountable? Because a lot of the time it's because there's this naivety around the fundamentals of this teamwork. Remember, there's 10 to 40% potential uplift in this space if you get it right. I want to just get us to reflect before we sort of wrap it up. Where is your energy directed? You know, are you directing it more into that sort of management space, which is typically what happens out there because there's a naivety around the fundamentals of teamwork and the leadership piece? Or is it in this leadership space where you're really focused on the people side of it, developing the trust and creating the dynamic that supports the high-performance team? The key principle of the 21st century is to learn, unlearn, relearn. In this exponential phase that we live in, if we don't continue to learn, unlearn, relearn, we are going to get left behind. What are you doing to upskill yourself as a leader? What are you doing to stay contemporary in this space? And the key to being an effective leader, in my observations over many years and having been researching this space for several decades, is curiosity. If you aren't curious, then you haven't truly stepped from the management mindset into the leadership mindset. And my question to you is, how much are you nurturing an open and curious mindset? So what I'd like to do is, if anyone's got any questions, because I'm out of time, I've got the red flag happening up here.
I'm Elise from Pharmacare. I was wondering, do you have an example of a bonding activity that the State of Origin guys did in those 2 days?
Yep.
That's different from obviously having drinks on a Friday?
Well, it's not just State of Origin. Actually, most professional sports teams get this, and the really good coaches all get it. And the club coaches, for example, will do the State of Origin concept. They'll do their pre-season camp. They'll have that around Christmas time. If it's for example, a winter season sport, they'll have that around Christmas time. And a good example of it is basically having conversations about stuff that's going to allow the players to understand each other. So, for example, one of the sessions that I run with companies and corporates in this space is I'll get the people in the room, there might be 16, 18, 20 people in the room, and I explain the importance of being able to understand and connect with each other. And I'll get them to identify someone in the room that they've had a disagreement with, that if they worked more closely with them, they would do their job better, or that they just don't know. Do not pick someone that you know really well. And what I say is pair up with that person, and everyone pairs up. Right? Then I give them topics. So what I say is the first topic, and we're going to do this a number of times. We're going to rotate around a number of times, right? The first topic is usually a simple topic, usually get-in topic about, tell us a bit about you, your childhood growing up, what was it like? Yeah. And then it moves more into the space over a number of, so they'll speak for a few minutes each, and then we'll rotate around again. Then we get to the next topic, and then peel down to the layers to get a bit deeper, but to get to topics like, what's the most courageous thing you've ever done? What's the biggest challenge you've ever had? What's the biggest risk you've ever taken? These types of topics are topics that give you an insight into that person without that person having to sort of think about describing what type of person I am. So you're talking about the experiences and challenges that person has had. And that is a really good way to get people to create an environment that allows people to understand each other. That's exactly what we do in Origin, yeah. Now, what as a coach in Origin I'm looking for emotion. When I get to the deeper topics, I'm looking for topics that are going to elicit some emotion. And you know why? Because if I'm talking about my mum and I start to get a bit emotional, maybe a couple of tears well up in the eyes, so I'm sharing a bit of sadness, a bit of grief, guess what happens? You, as the person who's sitting opposite me, is going to feel, if you're a decent person, and you shouldn't be employed within business if you're not, you're going to feel a sense of empathy and compassion, which reciprocates the sadness and grief. Guess what that does? That bonds you together. So bonding is an emotional connection. Most people got no idea what it means. We use the term, but people don't understand what it is. It's an emotional connection. So as a coach, what I'm doing is I'm looking to elicit that emotion. So I sort of try to go a bit deeper. That's just one of a number of activities that we would do and not just when I say we, people that understand professional sports coaching, they'll do that sort of stuff. So good question.
I'm Danny Chia from Kelly+Partners. I guess what I want to understand is how much of what you talk through here in this new world can be trained versus how much has to be recruited for, if that makes sense. What's the importance on finding the great people? Without
a doubt. There's a huge component that can be trained because largely, a guy called Howard Gardner, if you have heard of him, Howard Gardner's the guy who he did all the research into the various types of intelligence. Yeah. And he said the highest paid form of intelligence is social intelligence. It's not IQ, okay? It's EQ. It's emotional intelligence, and that can be trained. And one of the biggest gaps in that space is the gap around people understanding their emotions and how to control them, which is a large part of emotional intelligence. Part of that is because there's a lack of awareness around our distress pattern. Every one of us in this room has a distress pattern that we slip into every single day. There are 6 different types of distress patterns depending on what your primary personality base is. Yeah? Some people will attack others, frustratedly attack others and get pissed off with others because they're stupid. Some people will play the victim. Some people will bend the rules to get an outcome. But they're distress patterns. They're not patterns. They're not the normal patterns. So that can be taught. Communication can be taught. Communication, the ability to read people and understand which of the 4 communication channels, because there are 4 communication channels which we should be aware of. Mostly in business and in our school system, we get taught to use 2 of those channels, okay, which is the information channel and the emotion channel. But there's another channel, the fun channel, and the directive channel that accounts for 35% of people. We don't use the right communication channel with those people, they switch off. Yep. And how does that convert into sales and dollars? It's big. We switch those people off, you're not going to get the business from them because we're not communicating well enough. We can lose money in that space. So, there's a significant component that can be trained and upskilled, without a doubt.
Just interested, when I look at sort of the professional football scene at the moment, there's 2 high performers that have had long-term good results, being Queensland State of Origin, and I'm thinking of the All Blacks as well. Do you think that what's driving that is raw talent, or is it management systems that are actually getting those results? No,
there's a saying in sport that good players make good coaches. But having said that, I believe that the differentiating factor with Queensland over recent years has been the belief factor. I believe there's 4 key inputs to success. I call it the Phoebe principle. It's focus, effort, belief, and innovation. And I think the belief component's the one that New South Wales have been struggling in, where Queensland really are dominating in that space. And I think one of the things that Queensland got the jump on us in, they got the jump on us in what I call marginal gains, and they are the 1%ers. They were working on a lot harder on the 1%ers for a lot longer than what New South Wales have been. And success for me is not it's not secret. Like I pick up these books, The Secret to Happiness, and the 7 tips to blah blah blah. The fact is that success isn't something that you stumble on. It's the result of effort over time in areas that will cumulatively aggregate to give you a better outcome. It's like putting money into your super over a long period of time. You don't get much benefit at the start, but over time you get a huge benefit from those early inputs. And for me, what allowed me to be competitive as a rugby league player, look at me. I'm a scrawny 180 centimetres and I played at 90 kilos, right? But what allowed me to be competitive was I focused on the marginal stuff. I focused on the 1%ers. I was the first person to dive into the scientific approach because I fortunately went to university and did a science degree and studied psych and all that sort of stuff. I applied a scientific approach to rugby league. So I've got a huge advantage in that space, particularly in the mind, the mental preparation. But with Queensland, I think there's a belief issue that is positive for Queenslanders and not so positive in New South Wales. Hopefully, because we won against the odds on the bell in the last game last year, that's a really good, fertile ground for the New South Wales team to build on in terms of belief going forward. And I think I'm just about out. There might be time for one more question. Was there one up the back there? He's the first guy to have his hand up, and he's the last person to get to.
But I just wanted to go back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago around bonding with the State of Origin team and some of the tactics you use. But when you look at disc profiling people, you look at communication styles, obviously those tactics work very well for people who are high Ds and high I type personality types. But for people who are very guarded within your team and don't tend to give a lot, do you still find those tactics work quite well, or would you tend to adopt different type tactics for people who don't tend to share quite as much?
So what was the last bit there? I missed the last bit of the question.
So for personality types that aren't as outgoing, for argument's sake, as yourself, when you're using those bonding style tactics of asking questions about childhood and about things like that, would you find that those same tactics would apply quite well to those people, or would you have to adapt to it?
Never had a problem. Never had a problem with those questions, for example. And I've over the past 16 years, so 16 years since I coached. In that time, I've been working with businesses, right? And I've worked with thousands probably. I do it every day. Yep. The keynote stuff like I'm doing now, small part of what I do. Most of what I do is workshops, getting people to understand and change and improve as teams. Yep. Never ever had a problem with somebody saying, I'm not going to do this. And I'll tell you why, because I frame it up. I frame it up like this. I explain to people that, do we really want to understand one another? And I say, okay, the topics that I'm going to give you allow us to understand each other a bit better. If everything could be known about you, between those two fingers sits everything that can be known about you. At that one end there, that's how much you know about the people you work alongside of. You think you know a lot about them, and you've been working with them for 5-10 years, there's a lot of stuff you don't know, right? Because the work's busy, we don't really go there because we don't talk about stuff. Over here is a no-go zone. Don't go to the no-go zone because you don't feel comfortable. Don't go there. But look at the space between the two thumbs. That's where I want you to go to in this conversation. And as members of the team, your teammates are going to benefit from learning that stuff. So what happens is they control what they say. So no one feels uncomfortable in that space. And you're still going to get amazing outcomes and amazing benefits for your businesses, for your teams. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure it's going to be a great day. Brett, thanks for the opportunity to come along.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.